So there's audio now. So here we are again. This is part 3 of the Rebuild the Temple series. This is the Move Well portion of the class. In the first 2 classes, let's see, the first one, we talked more about the general overview of health, and really we brought some concepts, some wellness concepts to your consciousness. In that, we also talked about our beliefs triangle, and what the beliefs triangle does is it allows us to really kind of backtrack through on. So our beliefs are going to dictate the behaviors that we are acting out, and those behaviors, the action's the only thing that really gives you the result. Okay. And then we talked about how that result is not only just based upon your actions, but it will reinforce your belief. So whether your belief is true or not, whether it's constructive or destructive, the actions that you take are going to follow those beliefs and give you the results. And then if those results are suboptimal for what you want to be experiencing in your life, then what you have to do is you got to back it down and look at the beliefs. Okay. So we have that video posted. So if you need help finding that, just reach out to us and we'll get it to you. Very, very valuable. And then in part 2, we talked about the eat well portion, and real simple and easy in eat well. We talked about how we should be eating based upon what we know our genetic requirements to be. And so very simply, I could have done that workshop in 30 seconds. So I'm going to give you the whole eat well workshop right here. Eat real food. Okay. You want to eat food locally. You want to eat it as chemical free as possible. And you want to eat, so you want to be able to eat your live food. So your grass-fed meats, your vegetables that are grown in your garden, or you get them at the farmer's market, and fruits, vegetables, meat. And that's really what our genetic capabilities are optimizing foods for our genetics. So let's go ahead and we'll dive right in here to part 3. And that is, again, this is the Move Well class. This is one of my favorites because in Move Well, this is where chiropractic really lives, in terms of how the things that we do, Dr. Jenny and I do in the office on a day-to-day basis, how we impact people is really through this Move Well portion of it. And we're going to try to connect the dots to you on that. But the first thing I want to talk about here is something that was quite staggering. This is a very, very old stat. I would be willing to bet that, after 2020, after COVID, after a lot of people were kind of locked down, that this inactivity level had increased, I would assume. But 70% of adults in America get less than 30 minutes of exercise. So first of all, the research that's done on exercise in the through the medical lens, or the allopathic model, is really looking at what's the bare minimum that we need to impact chronic disease. That's really where this 30 minutes of exercise had come from. So essentially what they're saying is that you can have a rapid decrease in chronic illness if you're simply exercising 30 minutes a day. So that's basically like a 2-mile walk. Okay. 70% of Americans aren't doing that. 24% have zero physical activity. Okay. Now, on the flip side of that, if we go in the way back machine and look at our Paleolithical ancestors and the amount of physical activity that shaped our genes over centuries, we're going to be looking at, they were averaging about 12 miles of walking a day, or the physical activity equivalent to about 10 miles of activity a day, 12 miles. So, we're far from that. And, in modern living, who in the world's got time to go 12 miles? So there's other ways to try to fill the gaps, so to speak, but we can see right here how deficient we are on the movement aspect of things. If we can remember back to the first two classes, we talked a lot about how being healthy is simply having the cells of your body doing what they're supposed to be doing all the time. And the genetic requirements for our cells built upon is, again, this about 12 miles, the equivalent of 12 miles of physical activity. So how much money, we've talked about this slide, and it's going to come up a couple more times. And the reason I keep bringing this son of a gun up is because our healthcare system, also better described as our sick care system, the system of healthcare that we have that's designed to treat illness, not improve health, is very, very expensive. And this is how much lifestyle is costing us per day. We're looking at over $2 billion per day in lifestyle expenditure. Staggering number. So this is not going to be solved by finding different payers for the problem, right? You could have all the taxpayers in the United States, footing the bill for this, and it's not going to really solve the healthcare crisis. Okay, could help financially with some people, and it could harm some people as well financially. But my thought process here is we need to focus on creating health to eliminate sickness and disease. That's what we need to look at. And in order to do that, we have to eat well, move well, and think well. So here's the problem. Our genetic makeup determines what we need nutritionally and what we need from a physical activity standpoint. And since our genome has been essentially unchanged for a very, very long time, and if you look at the way that we're living compared to the way that humans lived 6,000 to 10,000 years or before the agricultural revolution, you'll be able to see that it is drastically different. So because of this mismatch in the modern diet and lifestyle from our Paleolithical ancestors, it creates this sickness and disease, this chronic illness that is forced through us, or that is manifested in us through this poor lifestyle, essentially. So the way that we're built really is that we're built to move. We're built to have a lot of physical activity. And when we look at, let's see, with the industrial revolution, things got a lot easier physically on humans. But since the industrial revolution, what we also saw is that we saw initially, when it first started coming up, we saw a massive drop in life expectancy versus, if we throw out all of the, early deaths due to like starvation and fracture. When we look at chronic illness, for sure, it's completely through the roof here on that. So we have to remember that our genetic expression, or the way that our cells are functioning together, the way that our body's working harmoniously to maintain and create health and adaptation, is really based upon the genetic makeup of a time when physical activity was necessary. If our Paleolithical ancestors were not physically active, they would either starve to death, or they would be killed by predators. So we have to incorporate some of that movement that we have in our lives. So when we start to reduce the amount of movement that we have, then we see this failure to adapt scenario start to creep up. And like I said before, we talk a lot about the toxicity deficiency. I want to talk a little bit about energy imbalance. So the reality of it is that right now the the caloric intake or the fuel for our bodies is super easy to get. And we can get this fuel without even having to really move. Essentially, you can go through a day, like the slide earlier said, 24% of people in the United States get zero physical activity. I don't know how that's possible. You know, you walk to the fridge, you can jump in your car, you can drive, you can go through a drive-through, you know, you can have a bag of food thrown on your lap through the drive-through window, and then you can come home and you can park it back on the couch or in front of the computer and get back to work and you know, literally not move throughout the day. And what this creates when we have excess calories coming in versus calorie burn, that creates a metabolic derangement within the body that creates a lot of issues. So it is estimated, well, this is back in 2000, this study back in 2000 in the Journal of Applied Physiology, it's estimated that 25,000 deaths per year in the United States are just literally due to physical inactivity. But if you look at some of the top chronic diseases, and you know, this 250,000 deaths here, but when you look at, there's about 600,000 deaths that's from cardiovascular incidents. And then you look back to the fact that the majority of cardiovascular incidences are from lifestyle issues or stressors, then we can see that this number probably could be a lot higher. But this particular number is specifically and strictly for the inactivity itself. So you look at that, it's, well, so our genes. We talked about how our genes are built off of our ancestors, and there is a lot of literature out there. This one is in another Journal of Applied Physiology 2002 article. But when we look at that, there's evidence in the literature that supports that physical activity of less than 30 minutes a day of walking accounts for the majority of our chronic health conditions that we are experiencing in our elderly population, and now more and more in our children. Our children are being diagnosed at a very rapid rate of having chronic health conditions that used to only be known to adults. And then when they look at like hunter-gatherer societies that are alive now, and hunter-gatherer societies that were around thousands of years ago, and they test those, they can identify that the chronic health conditions that we're suffering from don't even exist in those societies. So genetics are very similar. Are genes to blame? The genes are not to blame. Okay. When I was going to school at Palmer, I had a friend of mine who had a genetics background. He was actually a geneticist, and he was the first person that I ever heard talk about epigenetics. And when he was talking about epigenetics, and I started diving into that, basically what this is simply your genome is basically like a library. It's like an entire library that's filled with books. Okay. And inside of these books, there's different recipes, and these recipes get pulled out in order to allow our bodies to adapt in our environment in the best way that we possibly can to survive. Essentially, it puts us in, we're in our genetic makeup is designed to promote health. Health is normal. Okay. But these epigenetics that means that our genes, certain genes can get turned on and off depending on our circumstances, depending on our environment, depending on how we're moving, and thinking. So really where our lives hang out is not in this genetic circle. It's not in this lifestyle circle. It's in the middle. It's between the two circles. That's where we need to focus some of our attention. Here's another article out of the Journal of Applied Physiology that says the onset of progression in chronic illness or diseases are mediated in the vast majority of cases by interactions between genetic factors and environmental factors. These environmental factors are largely lifestyle factors, and that is mainly looking at physical activity and dietary patterns. Mentally and emotionally is also a gigantic role in this, but we're going to save that for the next class to dive deeper into that. So, right now our healthcare system or our medical science really is focused more on the abnormal, the basically cholesterol, triglycerides, hypertension, blood sugar, diabetes. But it's not really looking at the underlying cause. And the underlying cause really is poor dietary habits, inadequate physical activity, and adiposity. Even I would say the obesity portion of this is not the problem. The problem is in the behaviors and the activities and the lifestyle, the actions that create that state in a human being, that adiposity state, that fat cell building obesity. We showed some of these charts before. In 1985, the CDC started tracking obesity trends in the United States, and you can see when they first rolled this out, there was not a whole the states. There's only about maybe 40% of the states were even reporting, but even at that time when they were reporting obesity rates, they were looking at people, the general population of the state, that's 10 to 14% of that population being obese, was the highest mark that they were seeing. And then in 1994, this was the first year that they fully had the data collected. This was the first year. And this is also the year where they started introducing the food pyramid, which is how we were taught to eat. And if you want to know more about the USDA's food pyramid and dietary recommendations, then refer back to part 2 of Rebuild the Temple, where we dive a little deeper into that. I don't want to get into that necessarily today, but what we're seeing here is the effect of when we are taking in excess calories more so than the calories we're able to burn. That is at the foundation, the problem here with the obesity trends. So that was 1994. You can see that even in that short period of time of 9 years, we have a new category popping up where we have folks that are 15 to 19% obese, where if we drop back in time, they're at 10 to 14% in some of those states that jumped. That took a big jump. Okay, so then let's move it to 2012. We got some different colors to look at here, but in 2012, we can see that right now in 2012, there was no states. There was not a state in the country that was under a 20% obesity ranking. I bring these slides forward to really show you that it is absolutely impossible for this to be a genetic problem, because our genes do not change that fast. Our genes do not change that fast. So we go from 2012 to 2019, and here Colorado and DC are the only ones that are in the 20% range. But we're looking at probably a third of the states in the union here are over 35% obesity. So all of this money that we're spending on healthcare is not actually making us healthier. We're getting sicker over time. And that is not really okay with me. And if it's not okay with you, then I hope you dive into these and we start taking action, because it is our environment and our lifestyle that's going to affect the way that our genes are expressed. So the present epidemic is troubling for sure, but because the majority of these issues is due to excess calories and a decrease in physical activity, which is also tipping the scales to excess calories, and then you take that and then you look at where the healthcare focus is really downstream on let's treat cholesterol, let's treat hypertension, let's treat diabetes, and we're not really getting to the root cause of the problem, and it's a problem. So what they found in this journal article from Circulation 2008 is that genetic effects are subordinate to lifestyle and environmental influences. So what that means is that currently the big increase in sickness and disease and chronic illness that we're experiencing in our lives is really playing, it's really due more so to lifestyle and environmental influences. So why can't we just change that? We can start working to change these things, which is, you know, it's encouraging. It's absolutely encouraging that we can do that if we so choose. So the Industrial Revolution reduced our workload expenditure, so the amount of calories that we're burning in a day, by 50%. So when we look at the effects of that and how this is leading towards more of a metabolic derangement. When I say metabolic derangement, what I mean is that you have more calories coming in than going out, which means that your blood insulin levels are going to be higher. And when your insulin levels are higher, that particular transport hormone is responsible, or at least linked and tied into just about every single hormonal response that we have in our body. That this is something to pay attention to. So energy in versus energy out, metabolic derangement, we need to have the balance. When we study our Paleolithic ancestors, and when we study modern hunter-gatherer societies, we understand that our bodies are really more capable and more adaptive in a scenario where we're taking in slightly less calories than what we're burning. But when you have too many calories, it really does put a push on the stress response. And a lot of falsehoods about this is that, you know, we try to make up for excess calories by exercising more. And the reality of it is that you just can't, there's just not enough time in the day to exercise away some of the dietary choices that we tend to make on a daily basis. So let's say you go to Starbucks, for instance, and you get one of them lovely muffins with your coffee, and just simply by getting that muffin, yeah, let's see right here, 360 calories. So to get that extra 360 calories, what you'd have to do to actually burn off those extra 360 calories was you'd have to mow the lawn for 66 minutes. You could skate really fast for 21 minutes. You could weight lift for 115 minutes. You could garden for 66 minutes. You could cycle for 92 minutes, or you could jog at 5 miles an hour. So a 12-minute mile for 33 minutes. That is what it would take to burn that off. And, you know, there's just not enough time to do that. So if we take this concept of extra calories, and if we look, okay, so if we're getting 50 extra calories per day that we take in that we don't burn off, over the course of 6 months, that's going to equal about 5 pounds of fat. So you take that and you multiply it by 10, 15 years, then you can see how it's very, very, very easy. You're putting, you know, 10 extra pounds a year on. You can see how things can escalate pretty rapidly in that scenario. So in the study, and this is in the Journal of the American Medical Association, this journal, or this article here, but in the cohort study, they found that obesity significantly increased the risk of pancreatic cancer. Physical activity appeared to decrease the risk of pancreatic cancer, especially among those who are overweight. So again, you can see here that our genetic makeup is subordinate or follows closely to what our lifestyle is providing it. So when we look at activity, let's talk about what it takes now. So we're all busy. Most of us are busy. A lot of busyness. There's a difference between being busy and active. When I have a lot of stuff going on and my brain's busy, I feel like I'm actually doing more and I'm more tired and I'm more exhausted than when I'm actually moving my body more. So the more inactive you are, the busier the brain is. I'm going to show you in a few slides here. I'll show you how this all works. But being busy versus being active, there is a big difference there. But when we're trying to make up the gap between right now we're getting zero, 24% are getting zero physical activity, 70% are getting less than 30 minutes of physical activity. When we look at these numbers, we need to really understand that activity is cumulative. Okay, so let's say you are busy. Let's say there's just not enough time in the day to get out and move as much as you want to. How are you going to fit 12 miles into the scenario? The good news is that with better understanding of physical activity and exercise, there's different ways that we can close the gap on that. But everything that you do is accumulative, right? So like you drive to work, instead of taking the elevator, you can take the steps. Okay. And then when you're, park on the other side of the parking lot when you go to the grocery store, so you got to walk further. Some of these things are beneficial for sure, because activity is cumulative. The body just requires that motion. So we want to try to add a little bit in every day in every way. You don't need a gym membership to do it. I have a gym membership to the Y, and the last 14 days, 15, I may be on day 15, the last 14 or 15 days, I've been doing 2 45-minute workouts a day. And I haven't made it even to the gym to do that. I've got some, I got some things at home that I can do. I got some weights here that I work with, but you got to fit this. You got to try to figure out a way to just be conscious about it. Just be conscious about just getting a little bit more motion, getting a little bit more movement in the body. It's really, really important. Now, another reason why I love this Move Well class is because this is really where chiropractic lives. Okay. Chiropractic is not an alternative medicine. All right. The reason it's not an alternative medicine is because medicine is within the sickness and disease treatment model, where chiropractic is in the increasing health and adaptation model, which is completely different. Just like I said in part 2 workshop, it's almost like when sickness is really only the absence of health. Okay. Just like darkness is the absence of light. The only way to really get rid of darkness is by bringing light into the darkness, right? So chiropractic's focus is completely different. Medical research and allopathic research is focused on what do we need to do to change this symptom by this much. Okay, so let's say you have high blood pressure. Okay, how much high blood pressure medication do we need to drop it by so many points? And on average, how many points does it drop when we give this massive cohort group some medication to follow it? So even the research is really on that symptom and disease focused. And what chiropractic, again, we're focusing on the other end. So we're looking at how do we create sufficiency? How do we create purity? How do we try to eliminate some of the toxicity and deficiency, not only in our diets, but also in our movement patterns? Because when everything is moving properly, chiropractic, when the spine is moving properly, the body is able to get closer to homeostasis. The body is able to function more appropriately. And the way that it does this is neurological. Chiropractic lives in neurology. So when we look at this from a stress response standpoint, let's back up for a second. We're looking at neurology. The body's meant to move. And the beautiful design that God has given us is that in every joint of the body, in every muscle of the body, there are little mechanoreceptors that fire through motion. Mechanoreceptors, that means any kind of a mechanical change in either the positioning, so it can be squished, it can be stretched, it can be vibrated, but any change in the shape or the mechanical change of that cell is going to cause it to fire. That's a proprioception. That's a proprioceptor. That's a mechanoreceptor that signals the brain. Okay. So we've learned about in school, my kids have learned it already. I know because we'd homeschooled them for a while. So I know that I actually helped teach them this, but we all know the five senses. We've been taught the five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, and what's the other one? Taste and taste. But really, there's two more. There's two more that we should be well aware of, and that is, the vestibular system. So that's like balance, right? That's from the inner ears. And then we also have the proprioception. That is the seventh sense or the sixth sense, depending on how you want to label it. But what proprioception is it is how your body understands where everything is in space. Okay. That sounds funny when I say that, but let's put it a different way. If you put your hands behind your back so you cannot see your fingers, okay? And then you hold up some fingers. Make sure you're not touching them. Just hold a couple of them up. You know for sure which fingers you have sticking up and which fingers you have down, okay? That's mechanoreception. That's that body sense that allows us to feel that. So proprioception, when firing properly, when they're firing, it helps create more of a calming effect on the brain. Okay, it helps the brain reorganize, come down out of stress response mode. Now, nociception, on the other hand, nociception is more of a noxious stimulus. Noxious stimulus means that when the brain starts perceiving this type of a signal, it drives it further into more of a stress response mode neurologically up here in the brain. So when that happens, by the way, nociception also, when that's firing loudly in a joint, that's where you're going to be feeling and recognizing pain. Okay, this is how we can have someone come in with, say, like a back pain, and we adjust them. We get motion in that joint that's stuck or fixated. We get motion back in that joint, and then they get up off the table and they feel good for a little bit. They're like, oh yeah, that helped. That immediate change is not due to the body healing super duper fast. Okay, healing takes time. That reduction in pain is due to the firing of proprioception and mechanoreceptors. So that healthy signal overrides the negative signal to the brain, and we start feeling a little bit better. Okay, so we're not necessarily an alternative. So what a subluxation essentially is, that's what Dr. Jenny and I adjust every day. This is where the primary focus of our practice is all day long, is the adjustment, the checking and adjusting the spine. Is when you break it down, the best science available that's explaining what we're doing is it's essentially a movement deficiency at the segmental level. Now, the challenge is when you got the joint locked up, it doesn't necessarily move when you exercise. Okay, there's people out there, I've taken care of people that when they exercise, they feel good. When they don't exercise, they feel bad. It's the same process that we're doing. They're firing off mechanoreceptors. But let's just say like the lat here, the muscles in the back, the upper back muscles, if we took a gram of that muscle tissue, there'd be like 1 or 2 proprioceptors per gram of tissue. Whereas if we look in the upper neck, for instance, we're looking at hundreds per gram of tissue. So it's way more impactful to get that stuff moving. And then when you exercise afterwards, everything works more efficiently. So I have read in multiple spots that sitting for more than 4 hours a day has a negative effect on the brain, the nervous system, and the spine function. And sitting more than 4 hours a day, to some researchers, it is the equivalent to your brain as to smoking cigarettes is to your lungs. Okay, it's as hard on your brain sitting 4 hours a day as it is smoking cigarettes on your lungs. So something to take into consideration. So we got to find ways in our day to kind of break that pattern, because some of us, we just really don't have any options. If we're working at a in a job that doesn't allow us to move around, that forces us to sit, then we got to make sure that we're taking our breaks to get out and move around and fire off these mechanoreceptors so that we can help our body and our brain work more efficiently and better. So check this out. Some chiropractors went and used a functional MRI machine. So the functional MRI machine, for those of you that don't know, is used a lot for like brain mapping. So essentially what they do, they put people in the functional MRI unit, and then they would like flash different pictures, that would elicit different emotions. And that would allow the researchers to determine like which areas of the brain are firing off when they experience certain emotions. But what these chiropractors did, they were curious what the adjustment did to the brain. So they loaded a lady up into this functional MRI unit. If we look at this picture over here on the left, they had her wiggle her ankle. So all the color that you see there, particularly the red and blue, but let's focus on like the red, for instance. When we look at this, this is the areas of the brain that were firing when she wiggled her ankle. Then they pulled her out of the MRI unit. They give her an adjustment. They just evaluated her, adjusted her, what needed to be adjusted. They put her back into the MRI, and then they did another test. And you can see on the second one how much less firing there is. So you can see how there's just a really concentrated and coordinated effort. So what does this mean? Well, here's what it means. It means that the chiropractic adjustment actually improved the neural efficiency of the brain. So I can tell you for certain that I take care of a lot of people that really struggle getting out and exercising because they're just too exhausted from everything else that they've done in that day. And maybe some of that is because of all the wasted energy that's taken place, because the brain is not able to work in a coordinated fashion because of the negative signals that the body is sending it constantly. Okay. So that's something to consider as well. So the neurology is also not only mapping out our internal environment constantly at a subconscious level, but we're also taking in information from our external environment the whole time. All of that has to be processed, and then the brain responds in a way that is going to help us adapt and survive in that scenario. So why not try to have it adapt and survive as efficiently as possible? So at the end of the day, we have more energy to do the things we love. Why not? Why not go that route? So that's the brain. Okay. So when the brain is in more of a stressed state, like it is on this photo in the left, when the brain is in more of a stressed state, it actually shuts down like the prefrontal cortex, which is like the cognitive learning center of the brain, yeah, well, we're gonna leave it at that. It's the area, it's the part of the brain that allows us to learn, absorb information, math problems, for instance, right? Whereas if you're in a stress response, who the heck cares what 320 times 5 is, right? We just don't care at that point. The brain does not care. It's not a priority. We're in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you're not in thrival mode. You can't be in growth and repair at the same time you're in defense and survival. So when that happens, some things that we see, and we're seeing it in kids. I don't know, for some of you that are unaware of our practice and what we do, we see a lot of kids. And the reason we see kids is because we understand how important that this is to brain development and neurodevelopmental processes. So when the body's stressed from excess in the environment, excess stimulation in the environment, plus a decreased motion in the body, then it really starts to snowball this stress response, and we can really get locked in. And when you're locked into stress, your learning, your ability to learn starts to kind of go down. You're really more of an emotional learner at this point. okay, as you're surviving. And the reason you become more emotional with everything is because emotion works faster than thinking, okay? And if you're looking to survive, we want to work as fast as we can to get away from the threat. We see it in pediatric development. We see how neurodevelopmental issues are just skyrocketing. We go from 1 in like 144 or higher incidences of, well, let's see, what was, I don't have the numbers exactly. I could pull up the workshop, but we go from like 1 in a couple of hundred having autism to now it's like 1 in 40 are getting diagnosed on the autism spectrum. You know, that is not due to genetics. That is due to the inability to adapt to the things that we are doing on a daily basis. So another interesting thing that we had seen in research is that when you're under chronic stress, okay, even if whether it's chronic pain or just chronic stress in general, the brain actually loses volume, meaning it shrinks. Because you're only using certain parts of your brain. You're only using the survival parts of the brain. You're not using like the growth parts of the brain. So motion and movement is extremely important to neurology and extremely important to our brains. When we get into this fight or flight, it's absolutely important. And being in fight or flight, being in the stress response is not in and of itself a bad thing. But the problem is that we have chronic stress nowadays, where if you look into hunter-gatherer societies and you look into the Paleolithic, our ancestors and how they were living, really the only chronic stressors that our genes have adapted to is really lack of food or starvation for the most part. Everything else is more of an acute stress response, right? That predator, that tiger jumps out at you, you get away. If you get away, you live, you relax, you're grateful that you're alive, and then that stressor is able to downregulate, and you get on with living. Whereas now in today's world, we're bombarded by stress for sure. We have more physical and emotional stress. When I say physical, I'm let's just talk about sitting, for instance. We have this physical stressor that is so constant in our lives. And then we look at the fact that everything's just so ramped up and busy. Our lives are so busy, and that mentally and emotionally our stressors are up high too. And the body just does not have an efficient way to deal with that. We are not designed to be under this chronic stress. Every chronic disease can be tracked back to the stress response. Every one of them causes a stress response. Every one of them is a result of a stress response. So what is there to be stressful about, right? I always get a kick out of this. I got to put this one up, the USDA dietary guidelines, where you want to avoid fatty meats, get daily exercise, eat your veggies. You can see all that here. But the reality of it is that, if you sit through the last one in the eat well, we don't necessarily need to avoid fatty meats. We need to avoid commercially grown fatty meats. And if you're going to be eating some fattier cuts of meats, you're going to want it to go with like grass-fed. Okay. Grass-fed meats are going to give our bodies the type of fats that really all of our cell membranes are made out of. We look at it. So it's very, very helpful to eat these types of things. But this is a stress response right there. I'd be pretty stressed out and hope to get away from that guy too. So I like to think of as movement, we call it vitamin M in the office. We need to get more vitamin M. It really is it's an essential element of the body. And when I look at exercise, just as taking a dietary supplement, because if we were able, or if we were required to live the way that our ancestors did, we wouldn't have to worry about exercising, because all day long we were getting movement and exercise. It is absolutely essential. So in order to really have health, we have to optimize cell function. And we talked about this a minute ago, but sickness is just simply the lack of optimal cell function. So if you have cells that are functioning suboptimally and they're causing a symptom, let's say high blood pressure, and you give your body a medication that's going to artificially lower that, does it create better cell function? I don't think it does. I don't think it does. This is why we can see more and more people every year are getting on cholesterol medication. More and more people every year are taking blood pressure medication. Every year, more and more people are treating symptoms and sickness with medication. And every year, our population's getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. There's studies that I looked at when researching all this here that even suggest that, maybe it even doesn't make a difference to lower cholesterol, and to, maybe it even makes things worse in some cases when I've read that. And if you want to dive into some of that more, today's not the day to do it, but just reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to share some of my resources on that. But let's get back into this. So because we sit so much, spinal hygiene is kind of a necessity. Think of like, we take, and why spinal hygiene? Well, it's because the most proprioceptors, the highest percentage of proprioceptors in the entire body, something like 50-60% of all mechanoreceptors in the body are in the spine. Okay. So if we want to have a very healthy flood of stress reducing information coming from the body, hitting the brain, taking us out of that fight or flight, putting us into growth and repair mode, then we need to figure out a way to deal with this, right? So dentists did something amazing with hygiene in the past, where, back in the day, there was a lot of people that had rotten teeth, and, a lot of them didn't have any teeth, but then they decided, yeah, it's probably a good idea. Let's start taking care of them teeth. So now we got people on a regular, oral hygiene routine to try to take care of this. And the result is simply healthier teeth. So how about doing some spinal hygiene? Just like brushing your teeth, let's brush that spine up a little bit and do what we can to mitigate some of the stressors that we have from, eating sugar all day, in this case, sitting all day. Okay. So a couple of really good ones are, if you're sitting all day, would simply be to get more upright. A lot of times when we're sitting all day, we get kind of slouchy, our shoulders are rolling forward, our head goes forward. So some of the stretchers, some of the things that you can do to mitigate this would be, I'm going to show you sitting. Actually, you know what? Let's go this way. I'm going to stop sharing that screen so that you can see all of me here. So some very easy, hopefully you can still hear me now. I'm going to speak up a little bit more, but some very easy hygiene things that you can do is simply opening up that chest, right? Squeezing those shoulder blades together, looking up like this. Okay. You want to get motion into your spine. Okay. So you take, you set a timer on your phone at work to go off every 30 minutes, every hour. Okay. At minimum every hour. And then you get up and you do some range of motion exercises. So if you're doing the low back, you reach down your leg real slowly as far as you can, get to that end range of motion, relax, come back up, go the other way, get to that full range of motion, relax, come up. You want to be able to get rotation, go to that full range of motion. And then you want to get full range of motion the other direction. Very important not to get jerky and try to get things to pop and things like that. You're just simply getting that motion in the spine. And by doing it slowly, you're able to fire off more mechanoreceptors slowly. And trust me, your brain is hearing this. Your brain is taking in this information, and it's mitigating, it's calming down the stress response. So same thing with your neck. You can bend your head one direction. You can bend your head the other direction. Turn your head as far as you can. Get to that end range of motion. Hold it for about 7 seconds or so. Just simply doing those types of range of motion exercises can be very, very big. Okay, can be very helpful. Now, if you're dealing with like a foggy brain, okay, cloudy brain, you can just kind of feel some stress, some minor irritation, some tension across your shoulder blades. One very easy little thing I like to have people do is a simple breathing exercise where you take a big deep breath in, Take it in as far as you can and hold that breath. Bring your shoulders up to your ears. Get them up as high as you can. And then you squeeze your shoulder blades together. You hold that breath, right? You hold that breath and you just squeeze as tight as you can. And then you relax and breathe out. Just let all of that tension melt away. I challenge you folks that are sitting all day long to do that. And it's amazing how good it feels on your neck, how good it feels on your brain. Very, very, very simple things to do. So let's see, we're here, I believe. So back to it. Those are just an example of some daily spinal maintenance types of exercises. You know, you can do the door stretches. A lot of people that I take care of that are in their 50s and 60s, they just have bad shoulders. Okay. And when you have bad shoulders, it pulls on the neck. And so, you know, these things, they're just stretching that back and getting motion. Ranges of motion are really in my opinion, the most important aspect of just spinal hygiene itself is getting full range of motion in the joint. When it comes to a fitness standpoint and getting that actual activity and motion, functional fitness, that's where it's at. So what is functional fitness? Functional fitness is simply just moving like a human. So if you're getting out there and you're moving, okay, and you're moving multiple joints at the same time, and you're sweating and you're panting, you know, that is functional fitness. Okay, so there's different exercises for sure that help to that would fall in line with this. So you can do things like, you know, planks. You can do things like mountain climbers. You can do things like squats and lunges and push-ups. You know, these are functional fitness movements that does not require a gym membership. You know, if you're doing squats, I prefer people to do them, you know, body weight squats with really good form, because you can't injure yourself with like squats and deadlifts and some of these other functional fitness things that are extremely beneficial for your body. But, you know, if you're going heavy, and you don't know what you're doing, they're also something that can create injuries. So, you know, if you're going weighted, then make sure that you know what you're doing when you're going weighted on these things. Let's go back up. So a couple other things to consider when we're talking about fitness and motion is that there's a lot of ways to do this. And if you're doing something you enjoy, that's important. But as you age, one of the things that we do naturally is we lose muscle mass. So to be extremely healthy into your 70s and 80s, it's important to do things that allow you to try to keep some of that muscle mass on there. Muscle helps increase your metabolic rate, so you're going to have less of that that metabolic derangement. So your basal metabolic rate simply is how many calories do you burn doing absolutely nothing during the day. That's where the majority of our calories are burned, is that basal metabolic rate. And by exercising regularly and by getting a little bit more muscle mass or lean muscle mass on the body, you're going to increase the amount of calories that your body's burning at rest. Okay, so it just sort of snowballs and creates a lot better environment for success. But really the keys to functional fitness is you want to be doing things that are creating endurance, stamina, strength, flexibility, power, speed, coordination, agility, balance, and accuracy. You want to be able to move in a way where you're building these aspects up. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. So here's a little cheat sheet for our you know, things to consider when it comes to exercise. Number one is, you really only need to worry about exercising on the days that you eat. That's it. You want to exercise on the days that you eat. And you're only really considered exercising if you're moving and if you're sweating and if you're panting. That's all the requirements you need for exercise. You need to move, you need to breathe heavy, and you need to sweat. So you want to be able to do the activities that make you happy. Okay. You want to do what moves you. And you want to do just a little bit more tomorrow than you did today. You want to improve. You want to progress. Okay. You don't have to be perfect. I am far from perfect on this. Like I said, I'm doing been doing 2 workouts a day now for the last 14, 15 days. And, I feel great. I feel great. In the beginning, my body was a little bit, run down from not being used to it. I was a little bit sore. I'm kind of through that now. I feel really good. But just like all of you, or maybe not all of you, some of you are probably way better at this than me. I fall off. I'm far from perfect. My lifestyle, my behaviors, they're far from perfect. Okay. Before starting this 14-day routine that I'm on, let's see, last January, I went for 75 days doing 2 workouts a day, every day for 75 days. And then when that was done, I did maybe like 1 or 2 workouts a month. So listen, that happens. When it happens, what do? Bring consciousness back to it. What happens when you start thinking about it? You bring consciousness back to it. It brings you to action, and you just jump right back on it. Okay. The only thing that you can really perfect is the amount of effort that you put into it. And, that's all you can really ask for out of yourself is effort. Okay. Putting effort into the movement. So other things to consider to help you along to be a little more, I guess, committed to what you want to do. First of all, there's an intrinsic value of it. Okay, this is where, if you study the beliefs triangle that we covered in the first part of Rebuild the Temple, and if you go through, you can have some intrinsic pushes, meaning it kind of comes from within. You have your own reasons for wanting to be more active. Another good source of influence is to, make a goal. Okay. So I'll give you an example of a good goal versus a bad goal. A bad goal would be to simply say, I want to lose 20 pounds over the next, 3 months. That would be a bad goal. Okay. Because it doesn't really give you any kind of an action. So a better goal would be an action goal, because it's our action that we take consistently that's going to give us our result. So a good action goal would be, I'm going to exercise for 45 minutes every day. Or, I want to be able to do 100 squats 100 air squats at one time. These would be a little better do goals. Okay. And if you make those goals public, it tends to drive you more, because now you gotta, stand up to what you're telling people you're going to do. So you want to keep on doing that. It's also okay to reward yourself and give yourself some penalties. I can tell you back when I would go to the gym regularly, when I was the most consistent and when I was working out the hardest and I was getting the best results, I had a buddy that was going with me. It's just knowing that someone's waiting for you to show up and to work with them. That's enough to help get the covers off of you in the morning. That's enough to, get the old athletic shoes on. So I always say the hardest thing about working out is getting your shoes on to go do it. That's the hardest thing. Another thing you do, you make a little bet with someone. You can, play games. You can have checklists. Some people like to work off of checklists. Propinquity simply means the people that we spend our time around, we tend to be more like. Okay. So you want to spend time around people, if you're really super focused on improving your health, if you're really super focused on trying to increase your level of fitness, then it is very, very extremely helpful. And I'm going to say even necessary to be around other people that are on the same journey, because it helps improve, or it helps you kind of push through and do the things that you need to do. It's just going to happen more naturally without you even thinking about it. So we've heard this all the time, you're most like the people you spend the most time with. So if you need to take some time and spend some time with some people who are working hard to improve their lives, improve the lives of their families, then, spend some time with those types of people. Another big one for me is you got to think bigger than yourself. For me, I've got 4 boys, and I picture, as I'm aging, as they're aging, they have grandkids. I want to be able to do the things that I'm doing with my kids now. I want to be able to do that stuff with my grandkids. You know, when the kids come over, I don't want to have to be like, oh, I'm sorry, Johnny, I can't like hold you and walk you around the grocery store holding you because, you know, my fitness level is not, I'm not strong enough to be able to do that for you, to be able to have that experience. So that for me is a really big one, is just future casting and understanding that by leading a healthier lifestyle, everything that I do that puts healthy lifestyle behaviors into my action, everything that I do is going to improve my future. And if my future is good, if my energy levels are good, if my brain is clear and functioning efficiently, then I can improve and enrich the people around me. Okay. Same with the office, same with the people I'm taking care of. If I take care of myself better, I'm able to take care of them better. And it's the same thing for all of you. So you got to figure out what's your driver, and you got to anchor yourself to this driver and get that extra influence. If you need some help with some of this Bonfire Health is something that I'm a part of. But Bonfire Health is a place where you can go that gives you some tips on how to eat, move, and think. Now, this program is based upon what we're learning in the Rebuild the Temple workshops. So you can check that out as a resource. So that's what I got for you today, folks. The big takeaway is let's get out and move. Let's get out and move. And, you know, life is motion. Don't forget that life is motion. And don't forget that next Thursday, we're moving into the think well portion of it. And when we talk about stress in the physical, chemical, and emotional realm, you know, for some and for many, the emotional stress and the mental stress load that we're under is one of the most constant and destructive components of our health in this Rebuild the Temple. So everybody, I hope to see you in 2 weeks, and we'll move forward from there. Thanks, everybody. Bye.